Hey, what's up, you guys? It's Blade Jacob here to bring you another movie review. This time we're going to be talking about 2004's comedy Without a Paddle. What? Yeah, this kind of came from out of nowhere, right? Not really, actually. Because this movie is actually, I'll say it, probably my favorite comedy movie of all time. And that probably blows some of your minds, but it's true. I seen the movie quite a few years ago. Like I said, originally came out back in 2004, and I seen it right around that same time. I'm pretty sure we might have seen it in theaters, or we at least watched it somehow. Yeah, I remembered the movie for so long, and I actually had a VHS copy of it, but I just recently, a couple weeks ago, picked up the copy on DVD. I felt like it was a very essential piece to my collection. And of course, the movie stars Seth Green, Matthew Lillard, and Dax Shepard. And let's look at the back of it here. The movie gets way too much shit. Let me tell you guys. It didn't do so bad at the box office. According to Wikipedia, as reliable as that is, it had a budget of about $19 million, and it earned about $69.6 million at the box office. So not like a killing or anything, but, won a fair amount over its actual budget. So it was a financial success, I think. But, of course, it is pretty much panned by critics and viewers alike, and I just don't think it deserves all the hate. With all the comedy movies that come out nowadays that are actually more successful than this, I don't understand why this one gets all the hate, and those movies are more successful. Because I feel like this is actually a very good film, a very good comedy. I just recently rewatched it again with my girlfriend a couple days ago, and she loved it too, as far as I know. So, yeah, I really think it's an underrated movie, and it definitely deserves a lot more credit than it has gotten over the years. Like I said, it stars Seth Green, Matthew Lillard, and Dax Shepard. But I feel like Matthew Lillard should actually get the first credit for this movie, because his character is sort of the most developed and focused on throughout the movie. But I get that Seth Green's probably a bigger name, so that's probably why they put him first. But yeah, instead of trying to stumble and explain to you the whole plot myself, I can read you the back of the DVD, the description here. Seth Green, Matthew Lillard, and Dax Shepard star in this offbeat comedy as childhood friends whose lives have drifted apart but must reunite following the sudden death of a fourth friend. The trio finds out that he is hot on the trail of the $200,000 that vanished with real-life airplane hijacker D.B. Cooper in 1971. After discovering a map left behind, they decide to follow its course to claim the loot. They soon run into a few things that their friend hadn't planned on, including backwoods pot farmers with itchy trigger fingers, beautiful tree-living hippies, and a bear with maternal instincts that knows no bounds. Also starring the hilarious Burt Reynolds, Without a Paddle proves that it's better to be down a river than up a creek. And so there's a summary of the basis of the story. And I just think it's a comedy that I do think has a little bit of heart in it. Kick me if I'm wrong, but I do think it has a little bit of something extra in it, that's kind of missing from some comedies nowadays, in more recent years anyway. The movie's now like at least 11 years old, right? And I know there's a lot of comedies that try to put like some serious moments in it, but this one does it well while still feeling like the same movie. It doesn't feel like disjointed in its slower, briefly serious moments. You feel like it makes sense. Anyways, I think it does. And I really love the movie's intro too. We get this like montage of each of the main characters as kids, how they're playing around, like riding around on bikes, falling into rivers, just doing all these innocent yet sort of stupid things that you would do as kids, that you could think of. And I think Will Kidd, who played Seth Green's character, was actually pretty good. He's like just like the perfect little version of Dan, Green's character. So I thought that was funny. And it actually starts on kind of a serious note. We see where all the characters are years later. We see that Seth Green's character Dan is, yes, he's like a doctor, but he's having this crush on his secretary, basically, the girl at the desk, and he's just he's just not clicking with her. He's not able to really land her. And then, despite him being a doctor, he's still like looked down upon. You see the scene of him, getting his parking spot taken at the beginning of the movie. And the guy just completely disrespects him, and then torments him. And Dan, of course, has his own little problems too. He's paranoid. He has this he thinks he's what do you call it? He thinks he needs this inhaler, for his asthma, but we find out later it's actually all in his head, created in his mind. Again, hence his paranoia and extra fear that he has in himself. Just like a lot of lack of self-confidence and things like that. And Matthew Lillard's character Jerry, who I do consider to be the lead of the movie, he has a decent life actually, which he comes to realize a little bit more as the movie goes on. But we see he's working at this big office company type of building, and it probably pays well and stuff like that. But we see that he's just not really enjoying his life. We just see that he's tired of living this monotonous, dull routine every day. And that's why he needs to get out and he surfs and things like that too, just to really just ease his mind. Then we see that Dax Shepard's character, Tom, he's sort of more like the rebel, the slightly less intelligent member of the group. He's just sleeping around and things like that. But and the fourth friend that the description mentioned, Billy, we don't see much of him in the movie, but the adult version was played by Anthony Starr, and a kid actor named Carl Snell played the kid version that we've seen briefly. And we find out that he was actually the only one out of the group that was really, really successful. We see all these photoshopped kind of pictures of him, meeting Bill Clinton and going surfing and hiking Mount Everest and things like that, climbing Mount Everest I mean. And he goes off, and then he's actually killed in an accident, which, like I said, puts the film on a serious note right off the bat. And we find out, through this, we have this funeral scene, and of course Tom shows up on his motorcycle. He's like, "Is this Billy Newwood's funeral?" And it's just, I can't do this movie justice. It's just kind of come off worse when I try to talk about the comedic moments. But the death causes three of them sort of reunite, reconnect, and they sort of start hanging out after the funeral, and they go in this old tree house they all used to hang out in. Then they uncover this old map that they would talk about as kids. They were apparently fascinated over this D.B. Cooper story, which is actually a real criminal story and things like that. And he had landed, he had stolen all his cash. Then he just went missing after that. And I know the movie's not completely accurate with Burt Reynolds' character and things like that, or the name placement and things like that. But still, we can just say it's based off of that real life event. You don't have to say it's completely word for word, fact for fact tied to it. But it's just sort of based around what happened with that. You know what I mean? And they decide in Billy's honor to go on this trip. Try and find D.B. Cooper's treasure. And like the description says, it turns into much more than they ever planned on. And it's just a really fun and entertaining movie, I think. One of my favorite things about it that really appeals to me in it is the whole environment, the setting. The entire movie is supposed to be outdoors, even though they actually filmed it in a really large warehouse, if you look up that. But still, it really looks nice, the woods area, it looks like woods, the rivers look like actual rivers and things like that too, So I just really love the outdoor area, I like forests, I like woods and things like that. So I really love the whole premise of it, you know what I mean? And let's see, there's just plenty of these little comedic moments I could talk about throughout the movie. And something else about Matthew Lillard's character Jerry in the movie. Like I said, he has a good life he doesn't realize. He has that job that he's sort of tired of, which we can all kind of relate to. But he's also married to this woman called Denise, who's played by, let me look it up. Yeah, Dennis. Let's see. And I can't find the name. Okay. Bonnie Somerville. Okay. And she has appeared in a few other movies as well. She was a Screaming Woman in Spider-Man 2. She was on The Ugly Truth, a few other things. She's appeared on a few different TV shows. Yeah, nothing too substantial. But anyway, she was in the movie as well, obviously. And her character sort of wants this extra commitment from Jerry. And, he's just not really, it's not really clicking with him that he needs to tie this down, that he needs to, sort of settle down, mature. And going through this journey that they go through together in the movie sort of has them realize sort of everything in their life that they need to do, and with him especially, it sort of clicks with him that, oh yeah, he needs to hold on to what he has, and what he has is really something. And that goes into the ending a little bit better, which I'll get to in a few minutes. But there's also this bear that shows up in the movie. There's probably arguably two of the funniest scenes in the movie have to do with the bear and when they're canoeing down the river. Of course, Tom, like I said, is this rebel, troublemaker type of character, and he's just making up all these lies left and right, saying he was an instructor in a canoeing class and things like that. And so when they sail down the White River, they just have quite a bit of trouble, and the bear who had went after them previously, messed up the map. So things pick up, the canoe tips over, they all get back onto it, but then they fall down the waterfall, hence why the disc, hold on, I can show you the disc. Okay. Hence why that happens. And so that's all pretty hilarious. When we see the shot of Jerry in the canoe, he's just feeling like this, finally all this weight off his shoulders, and he's getting to just let go and have fun. And also, the bear, like I said, I'm kind of backtracking a little bit, but the bear is actually a trained bear that's been, well, of course it's a trained bear, but it's actually a bear that's been in quite a few other movies and shows. I think his name is Bart the Bear the Second, even though there's no connection to the first Bart the Bear, apparently. But this bear is also on Game of Thrones, too, ironically enough. I think he was in Season 3. I think he is the same bear that was after Brienne that Jamie actually saved her from. So there's a cool little tie-in there. And of course, one of the funniest scenes is where they run from the bear. Jerry takes off his shoes, and this happens because Tom's trying to catch fish, trying to use the flashlight trick, and it actually works. They're so surprised they don't catch the first one he tosses to them. And the bear shows up, and Jerry starts taking off his shoes. And, Dan, Seth Green's telling him, you can't outrun that bear, why are you taking off your shoes? And Jerry's like, I don't have to outrun the bear, I just have to outrun you. And that proves true. The bear gives chase, of course, and Dan, of course, trips. And he actually ends up being carried off by the bear. And, just Seth Green's acting and expression in this, just his sobbing and stuff like that, this was pretty hilarious, I think. And as he says, help me, as he gets carried off, I thought it was pretty funny. And then he goes through this where he actually has to take a bite out of a animal the bear had killed, because the bear's thinking of him as her cub and stuff like that. Which is, kind of far-fetched, but, it's a comedy, you gotta give it leeway. Then, of course, around the same time they're canoeing, they meet these pot farmers. Of course, there's this leader out of the two of them is called Dennis. He's played by Abraham Benrubi. And this guy's actually done quite a few serious films, too. I know he was in this Western my dad likes a lot. Let me see, Open Range. And, he's done other comedies, too, of course. He's appeared in a lot of television shows, too. But, yeah, then his buddy, the one he's working with, is named Elwood, I think. Yeah, Elwood. And that's Ethan Suplee, whatever. And, he was in, he also had a role in Remember the Titans, and he also had he was one of Earl's friends in My Name is Earl. He was in The Wolf of Wall Street, and he had other roles in some of the other Kevin Smith movies. But yeah, he was also in John Q, another Denzel Washington thing. Brothers, I think that was the movie with Tobey Maguire and Jake Gyllenhaal, which I still want to see. I've never seen that. And then, yeah. He was in Entourage for 2 episodes. But yeah, anyway, those two are pretty hilarious together as well. You know, like I said, like the description says, they're pot farmers. You know, they're weed farmers, you know, growers, whatever you want to call them. And, you know, they're basically making money off of that illegally. And, like I said, Dennis, sort of the leader of the two, and Elwood, sort of like the lesser-brained of both of them, you know what I mean? And there's a scene where they run into the base, where the 3 friends run to the base, and then they discover all their pot that they have packed in. And, you know, of course, Elwood and Dennis give chase, and, you know, send the dogs after them and stuff like that. And, you know, then as they're running through, like, all this weed they're growing, you know, they're shooting it up, and the flare went off, you know, causing the whole thing to ignite in flames and stuff like that. And it causes all of them to get high as they're running through, trying to get away from, you know, Elwood and Dennis shooting at them. And the dogs actually get high, which is, you know, kind of funny. And then Dan goes into this, like, Matrix mode, dodging the bullets and stuff like that. But after that, after they see all the weed that's burned after the friends get away, you know, Dennis and Elwood wants to use the cleaver. You know, he's like, cleaver's my favorite. And then, you know, Dennis is like, it's scary, but ultimately ineffective. And then you can just tell Elwood gets on Dennis's nerves sometimes. You know, of course, the bad guys don't fully like each other, you know. So, yeah, that's all pretty fun. And then they eventually run into the hippies that were mentioned in the description. You know, they're staying in this tree. You know, basically the most extreme, stereotypical versions of, you know, people wanting to protect the environment that there could be. And, you know, they're staying in the tree. They're, you know, going against logging companies and things like that. And they stay with them for a while. But, of course, they're all natural. They have hairy legs and they let all their hair grow out and stuff like that. At least on their legs, apparently. Not anywhere else that I know of. Then again, I don't know for sure. I don't think I want to know. But, you know, then in the meantime, Dan develops feelings for Flower. And then Dennis and Elwood show up to cut the tree down and things like that. And eventually they do run into Burt Reynolds' character. And, you know, he is actually, turns out to be a friend of D.B. Cooper. And, you know, after this hilarious scene of it pouring, you know, them being in their underwear after escaping from that tree that was about to be cut down. And, yeah, as they threw, like, the shit from the tree that they are keeping up there in the bags, you know, at Dennis and Elwood. But as they're hiding in the cave when it's pouring rain, you know, like, clinging together to conserve body heat, it's pretty awkward when this old man with a huge beard and a shotgun shows up and brings him into his cabin. But, yeah, it's Burt Reynolds, who turns out to be a friend of D.B. Cooper. And, you know, he explains that he tried to look for DB, you know, when he first heard about him landing, when he knew he was going to land, but he could never find him. But then when Dennis and Elwood show up later, you know, they try shooting up the place. And, you know, they find the phone that the bear had eaten previously. You know, as they were hiding in the tree, it ate his phone and stuff. It ate Dan's phone, I mean. And they find the bear shit in the woods, and the phone's still intact. And Jerry uses the phone to call Denise, but Denise is actually deciding to break up with him. And, you know, she's in the process of leaving him, you know, she's packing her stuff. And so Jerry's kind of traumatized by this, you know, but of course Burt Reynolds grabs him by the ear and drags him down to take cover behind the table. And, you know, I also like the scenes with Burt Reynolds explaining how long he just waited up there for DB, you know, how the years went by faster and faster as he got older. It's kind of sad, you know, depressing a little bit. But, so Dell is his name, Burt Reynolds, and, you know, he goes out there and fights off, well, like, sort of like scares away Dennis and Elwood, you know, blows up their quad. And, you know, Dan had some fun on that earlier, making Star Wars effects as they're riding away from it, trying to escape. And, yeah, it leads to, you know, a little confrontation at the top of the hill. And one of my other more favorite scenes in the movie, the slower moments, was after they escaped from that platform initially. You see that Tom is actually hit by a stray bullet. And then he sort of explains how he's always thought that his family's had this curse, bad luck. And how his father and his relationship wasn't always the greatest. We sort of could have figured something like that. But I like how it was explained a little bit more. And they all sort of were turning on each other in that scene too. But it leads to this confrontation. They fall into this hole, which was actually covered up by snow, so that's why Dell could never find DB when he originally landed. It was just a really well hidden area that DB had crashed into and broken his legs. And they see DB's corpse, he's like a skeleton now, of course. And they see he had burned the cash to stay warm, so a few more hours of life. And that's when it sort of clicks with them that, it's really not about the money, it's about having that life, it's about just living in general, and pretty much that living life to the fullest and hang on to what you have. And that's the lesson in the movie that I thought was actually delivered pretty well. And of course Dennis and Al would eventually track him down after they're trying to find a way out through this hole, saying, "Do you really want to hurt me? Do you really want to make me cry?" Which actually soothes Dan, as they're saying around the campfire way earlier in the movie. And I really like the quote from Jerry, about how when you were a kid, you didn't really used to care about what was cool or not. You'd listen to the song, just enjoy it for what it is, which some people should have the attitude of more often nowadays. And, Dan escapes through the hole, and Dennis and Elwood are, aiming down into the hole, trying to get ready to fire at him. Dan comes up, he hits Elwood and Dennis in the back with a big stick. Elwood drops a grenade before he pulled the pin. And they fall into a hole with Jerry and Tom. And, there's this little fight scene. Of course, it's ridiculous. Jerry and Tom trying to fight them both off. It's pretty hilarious, though. And, Dan's trying to decide what to do. He tries to pick up the big machine gun, but he just can't control it as it fires all around. Then he's about to drop the grenade down. All of the other characters say no at the same time. And, the sheriff, I didn't mention earlier, I apologize. I know I missed some things about the movie. But the sheriff they had met earlier in town before they really got into the forest and stuff shows up. And he gets them all out of the hole. And, you think, oh yeah, the movie's over now. But no, it turns out that the sheriff is involved in this whole corrupt plot. He's actually the leader of Dennis and Elwood, in this weed scheme they have going on here. He gets a huge cut of the profits and things like that, and he's the main one running the whole thing, apparently. And, Jerry tries to talk him down, and, then, they're kind of handing the grenade to each other behind their backs, and Jerry is hit in the stomach, so he drops the grenade, but he manages to throw it towards them anyway. The grenade goes off. The sheriff, Dennis, and Elwood, manage to avoid it, but it causes this tree to come crashing down on top of them just as they're about to shoot, our three friends and stuff. And I just thought it was kind of funny how the tree came down to three guys at the end and they just go flat. I thought that was kind of, it's hilarious. But, then, Burt Reynolds' character had, told them the way down the mountain, so they finally managed to escape. And, Tom, of course, Jerry and Dan are made into heroes after that, uncovering this whole plot, whole corruption and stuff like that. And Dell shows up at the end too, and he gives him, it turns out to be his share of the money that he had kept that DB actually hadn't burned. And we see that Dell is also carrying DB's bones, in his backpack to give him a proper burial, without the press actually finding out that that's who he is and stuff like that. And so, at first they're going to split it evenly between the three of them, but then Dan and Jerry decide to give it to Tom. And he had to pay off his bills and actually try to get back on his feet and, start a decent life, which was pretty selfless, from the other two. And, we see, a flash forward, we see Jerry actually realize that he needs to tie things down, needs to settle, and, realizes the good he has in his life. And he ends up, we see him propose to Denise at the end of the movie, which she happily accepts. We see Dan actually formed a relationship with Flower, so they met up again. They're staying in that tree house, of course, another, tree home type of thing they had there. And, we see Tom becomes a Boy Scout leader, as he said he was before, but he actually is now. And, most likely we're to assume he probably got back on his feet a little bit, and he's trying, he probably has a little bit better, more organized life at this point, we're supposed to assume. But we still hear him, lying, telling about how he jumped on the grenade to save his buddies and, blew him 165 feet in the air. But yeah, that's where the movie ends. Well, after, of course, a kid asking what a downstairs is, which, of course, is a joke throughout the movie with the two hippies and stuff. Of course, a downstairs, you guys, if you're above a certain age, you know what a downstairs is. But so that was pretty awkward and funny. And, it's different reviewing comedy. I usually don't do that. I don't think I've done it very rarely, if ever. But, so that's kind of where the movie ends, and overall, I just really enjoy this movie. I just think it's a lot of fun. And I know I didn't go through every comedic moment in the movie, but I assure you it is very funny, at least to me, and a few other people apparently. And I just don't think it deserves all the hate it's gotten over the years. I don't think it deserves to be panned by critics. I've seen worse comedies over the years that are more well received than this is, and I just think that's completely unfair. I think it's a very entertaining movie. And, I never paid attention to that direct-to-DVD spin-off, though. But as far as the original movie goes, it's probably my favorite comedy of all time. Definitely recommend giving it a look for yourselves. If you hate it, you can tell me, but be nice about it, come on. And, so I think it's a movie that is very, very underrated, and it actually is a pretty entertaining comedy and better than any other I've seen, really. So, hope you guys enjoyed this, probably a very extended review, longer than it had to be review, but I do hope you guys still enjoyed it anyway, and I'll catch you guys next time. And just remember, it's better to be up a creek than down a river. Ugh. Of course I said that backwards. It's better to be down a creek. Yes. Oh my god. Okay, of course I'd fuck that up. Excuse my language. But yeah, of course it's better to be down a river than up a creek. But anyway, catch you guys next time, and peace. That was awkward.